Okay, we'll open up the waiting room now. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. A lot of people are connecting to audio, so we'll give people time to get connected. Thank you all for being here tonight for our electric school bus webinar. We're very excited to be sharing a lot of great information with you about all the benefits of electric school buses and how you can make them a reality in your school district. So we appreciate all of you being here to learn with us, and we have a great panel of experts to share some important information this evening. So if you'd like, you can feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If you want to mention whereabouts you are, what school district you are affiliated, if you want to do that, feel free to do so. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. As you probably see, we are just doing the Zoom meeting format. Now, if you want to change the view to just see the speaker at the top right of your screen, you should see a view button. If you click that and then select speaker, you should get that big video of the person who is speaking on your screen. Now, if you prefer seeing all the different videos on there, you're welcome to use the gallery view as well. That's up to you. Whatever your preference is fine. And we are recording this webinar and are going to make it publicly available afterward. So please keep that in mind. If you feel more comfortable turning your video off, that is fine. And if you want to have your video on, that is fine as well. Right now, everyone except our panelists should be muted. We do have it set up that way so we can avoid any unnecessary background noise. But when we get to the Q&A at the end of our webinar, we will give folks the chance to raise their hand. And if you hit the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and then click raise hand, you should get a little digital hand showing up, and then we will call on people, as many as we have time for, and you can ask your question out loud. But you're also welcome to use the chat for questions. And at any time during the webinar, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. We may not get to it immediately, but we will be keeping an eye on that and then get to questions at the end during that Q&A time. All right, so now we are going to do a share screen and go through our agenda for this evening. And thank you everyone who's introducing themselves in the chat. If you have not done so, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, but that of course is optional, up to you. So we're starting with a welcome, and that's by me. My name is Brady Ferguson. I'm Director of Public Engagement with the Climate Solutions Accelerator of the Genesee Finger Lakes region. One of my main responsibilities is to support our Color Your Community Green teams and our Color Your School Green teams. And that's really, those are the teams that really made this webinar happen. So I don't get any credit for making it happen, but I'm just going to be the one helping to facilitate and moderate this evening for what we expect to be a great event. We have 5 guest speakers, all special guests, and you'll see their names listed here. Each one is going to cover a different aspect of electric school buses and how to bring these to your school district. And each one will be available at the end for the Q&A. So I hope you're able to stay with us until we end at 8:30. If you do have to leave early, never fear. We are recording this webinar and we'll make it publicly available later on. So if you have any friends, family, people in your school district who are interested but couldn't make it, they will be able to see this webinar. Let's go to the next slide. We wanted to start with a little poll, and this poll is anonymous, but this is just to help us all get a better sense of who is in the audience tonight and what level of experience, knowledge, understanding people already have related to electric school buses. So I'm going to open this poll, or I should say launch this poll now. And I would ask everyone to respond if you feel comfortable doing so. It is anonymous, so we won't know who responded what. But this is just nice to get a little bit of a better idea of who is participating in our webinar this evening. 4 easy questions, or hopefully they're easy. The third and fourth questions are actually the same question. I just had to split them into two because Zoom only lets me have a maximum of 10 answer responses per question. So for that question, I just had to separate it into two because I wanted to have all the public school districts in Monroe County listed there. So for questions 3 and 4, that's why it's the same question, just with different answer choices. Whichever one does not have your district, you can just hit other and then look at the other question, either 3 or 4, and you should be able to find your school district there. I'm sorry to say we couldn't include every private, every charter school because there are just too many. So you can just choose that other option for both if none of those apply to you. Okay, we're already at 72% of participants voted. I'll give it a little bit more time. And then I'll share the results of our poll, which will be interesting to see. We got a wide range of participants, looks like, as far as your role in your school district's decisions to move forward with electric buses. Some variety as far as knowledge about electric buses as well. And a number of different school districts represented, so that's great. Okay, we're up to 86%. Give it a little more time. We'll say 10 seconds, and then we'll share the results. And thank you to the folks introducing themselves in the chat. I see color Fairport Green is well represented. The Fairport Board of Education, Webster Board. Great to see some board members here, some Color Your Community Green teams here. Thank you for being here. And I'm now going to end the poll. So hopefully if you wanted to vote, you already got the chance to. Okay, now I'm going to share the results. You should be able to see this on your screen. And as far as current knowledge of electric school buses, most were in that I know a little category, 63% of the respondents there. But we had one who knows a lot, some who know a good amount, and one who knows nothing. That's okay too. No prior knowledge required. Question number 2, some parents here, parents/guardians, 3 school board members, welcome, a couple administrators, 1 teacher, another school staff, and others just concerned community members. That's great. Glad you are here. As far as the school districts represented, we have Brighton, Churchville, Chili, East Irondequoit, Fairport well represented, as well as Penfield, Pittsford, Rush Henrietta, and Webster. And there may be some others in there that actually don't have their name on here. Sorry again that I couldn't include everyone. So there are our poll results. Thank you everyone for participating. Now I'm going to introduce our first speaker of the evening. And we're very excited that they are with us this evening. Their first speaker is Mark Hanrahan. And Mark is the Matthews Buses sales manager. He has 21 years of experience in the school bus industry. He has worked with Bethlehem Central to secure Nyserda, or New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, grant money, allowing them to purchase 5 Thomas Julie electric school buses that they'll receive approximately in February of 2022. So welcome, Mark, and let's give him a little digital round of applause here.
Thank you, Brady. It puts a big smile on my face when I hear anybody say that. Bethlehem's going to be receiving 5 new electric school buses. It's a very exciting time for us in the school bus industry. Although it may sound like this is a new concept, electric school buses have been kind of behind the curtain, and we've been preparing for these opportunities the last probably 4 years. So it became apparent probably about 4 or 5 years ago that school buses were going to be an ideal application for electric vehicles. for electric school buses. For a couple different reasons. First off, they're emissions free, they're fossil fuel free, they're zero noise pollution, which is all fantastic because kids ride school buses. And for all those reasons, it started to make perfect sense. Prior to the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of the focus on electric buses was in the transit market. And I'm sure we'll be speaking to that a little bit later. But as the school buses became electrified by all the manufacturers and all the testing went on, the more everyone recognized the advantages that these vehicles will offer, not just, to be emissions free, but also because the application and the battery technology and the way the bus routing is structured. So to try to make that make a little bit more sense, if you put electric, say a Tesla on the road, and you're driving down the highway, you're getting fantastic, fuel economy. Not so much so with a big bus. And a school bus is a medium duty truck. It's a big, heavy piece of equipment, and it takes a lot of battery to move a big, heavy piece of equipment. And at first thought, you would think, gosh, how far can we possibly go with a school bus on running on batteries? Battery technology has come a long way. In addition to battery technology, regenerative braking has also come a long way. And school buses are a stop and go application, much more so than over the road trucks. So there's some advantages there. So again, behind the scenes, be happening. And here in New York State, obviously, there's been a lot of focus on putting deadlines and mandates out there to transition public fleets over to electric vehicles, predominantly in the cities, because that's where the most of the pollution's coming from. But interestingly enough, the most interest that we're seeing right now in the electric school bus business is coming from it's a combination, not just the bigger metropolitan areas, obviously New York City, Albany, Rochester, Syracuse, and Buffalo, but rural districts, as more and more people become aware that the application of an electric school bus is really ideal. It's ideal for a lot of different reasons. The typical school bus route is less than an hour. In fact, for many of the people on this call, you may realize this, but New York State school buses, or a student's not supposed to be on a bus for more than an hour. So if that means that at the farthest point that a bus goes out, it's got to get back within an hour. So a 2-hour run is just about the maximum. A 2-hour run will not use up all the energy in a school bus battery. And naturally, when the buses get back in after the morning run with the chargers that are out there, they have the capability to charge the bus again and have it fully prepared for the afternoon run. So those are just some of the highlights. And again, this started out as really being we understood it to be kind of an evolution. We kind of all accepted the fact that this is going to take a long time for the districts to catch on to the idea and gather all the information and make the public aware of what's out there. What we didn't anticipate was that the communities have been the driving factor in the interest in electric vehicles. And there are people that have been reaching out to me for the last 3 years asking, how do I bring this to the district? How do I approach the board with this idea? And so over the last 3 years, I would go back 3 years, there was some moderate interest. 2 years ago, there was increasing interest. And a year ago, in the last 12 months, there's been an avalanche of interest in electric school buses. And we're in the process right now of working with, I recognize a couple districts on the call who we've already had conversations with, which is exciting. Right now we're working with probably 10 different school districts across upstate New York, and trying to help them understand how you bring electric school buses to their district, and try to answer all their questions and put a timeline and realistic expectations on how much time it does take and how much money it takes to get there. But at the end of all this, the best part is this is truly good. Electric school buses are truly good for our communities. There's without question, from a carbon footprint perspective to operational costs. The longer you drive an electric school bus, the more savings you're going to realize, for the simple reason that there's some moving parts. There are still parts that are common on clean diesel buses and electric buses, but there's more that are not common. When you open up the hood, there's no engine. There's a motor, but it's electric, and there's a transmission which is driven by electricity, and there's heaters that heat coolant with electricity. So there's no oil, there's no fuel, other than plugging them in, which is not. There's a lot to that, obviously. But the buses are zero emissions. You can't say enough about how clean these are, and they make no noise. We're very excited in the school bus industry, not just us at Matthews Buses, but all of the bus dealers across the country, because this is catching on. There's electric school bus in Alaska already. There's 50 in Virginia. Maryland district down there just ordered over 320. In New York State, we're very proud to say that we will be delivering our first 5 Thomas Julie school buses to Bethlehem in late winter. And that was about a 6-month project, and we learned a lot working with Nyserda, the utility company, National Grid, the charging companies, site development companies, planning commissions. So we all learned a lot through the process, and this is the beginning. And this is not just the beginning for electric school buses and electric cars and electric transit in New York. It's international, it's global. And the other countries it's a race right now to zero emissions, and we're proud to be part of that.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing all that great information there. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to put questions in the chat at any time. We are going to save the questions for the Q&A at the very end, just so we can keep things moving. But we are recording this webinar, and if anyone needs to leave early, you'll be able to see the recording when we make it publicly available later on. So feel free to use the chat for putting questions at any time. And also we have on the slide here, you can see an event coming up that you're invited to. So feel free to check that out, coming up on Friday, August 6th. So there's an event, an open house, grand opening and open house. So feel free to check that out. Mark, is there anything else you'd want to say related to this event?
Yes, we're very excited. We opened up a new facility in Avon about a year ago. We weren't able to have an open house because of the virus. So we finally picked a day and we're very excited. We're going to have a lot of dignitaries there, including some of the senior officials from Thomasville buses, some local politicians. We are going to have an electric Julie there, and we're going to be giving rides. So it's going to be pretty cool. Great food. Going to have a band. Everybody's welcome. The only thing we would ask would be that you note the email address on there, and please try to get your reservation in as we're trying to get a final head count on the food and ice cream cones. Good ice cream cones too, by the way. If anybody has any questions about that event, that the email address on the line or on the flyer there is the contact. Thank you. Thanks for letting us get that in there. Appreciate
Great.
that.
Thank you for inviting our participants. I hope some people will be able to make it. And make sure you do RSVP to that email address that was on there by this Friday, July 23rd. So Mark, thank you very much. And
My
now
pleasure.
we're going to move on to our next speaker of the evening, and that is David Keith. Now, David serves as the coordinator for the Greater Rochester Clean Cities Coalition, an organization dedicated to promoting alternative vehicles and fuel usage, and provides program support to that organization. GRCC is part of the US DOE National Clean Cities Program. David is the principal of Shamrock Consulting, a consulting firm that has prepared alternative fuel vehicle studies for fleets, among other projects. He previously served as the director of fleet services for the city of Rochester. And while in that position, he introduced several types of AFVs into the fleet and facilitated the construction of a CNG fueling station. In addition, he served as the municipal parking administrator for the city of Rochester and managed the structured parking lots, and meters in the city's parking system. In this capacity, he was involved with several key projects, including the Hyatt Hotel and the Rochester Riverside Convention Center. He taught public administration in the MPA program at the College at Rockport, State University of New York. He also taught public administration and public policy classes at both RIT and MCC. He earned his Master's of Public Administration and a BS in History from the College at Rockport. Let's welcome David Keith.
Thank you very much. Katie, oh, there we go. Okay. I'm glad to be here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I have been involved with the alternative fuel program since about 1995 when I got on the board of Greater Rochester Clean Cities. And about 14 years ago, I became the coordinator after I retired from my day job at the time. So I've been working with this. We are a fuel neutral organization, meaning we really work with any options that will reduce petroleum. But right now, electric vehicles are very hot. And so we're working a lot with that. So I want to talk about some things about getting a program started. I mean, I think it's great to get caught up in the excitement of clean vehicles and so forth. But I think there's some things that need to kind of lay the groundwork for that. And one of the things is to look at really why are you doing this program? I mean, you know, there's good things around electric vehicles of any kind, especially buses. With think about the children's waiting out front of the of the elementary school for 13 years, 180 days a year breathing diesel fumes, and to change that is awesome. But why are you doing the program? Is it for environmental reasons? Is it for compliance of some kind? Is it a climate kind of thing? That's obviously very popular now. Are you going to save fuel? Obviously, you will save fuel with electric buses, but there are some costs on the purchase side that may change that calculation. Community demand. What does the community think about this? Obviously, I think in New York State there are about 750 school districts. Virtually all of them, except for the big cities like Rochester and Syracuse and so forth, the voters approve the budget, and they have to approve capital projects. So especially in times of scarce resources, it's a tough sell sometimes. So what is the community demand for this kind of a program? Next slide, please. So the stakeholders, I think that's important going into to really look at who's got a stake in this thing. To implement a project of this type, you really need to involve a lot of people. The employees are important, the drivers, the mechanics. If people aren't on board with it, they can really hurt the implementation of a program. That's been my experience. So you really need to get them on early, get their buy-in. The legislative boards, in this case, we're talking about the school boards, get them involved. Key departments within the district, the finance department, budget department, fleet folks, and we often have strong unions in New York State, public employee unions, and the union really needs to be at the table as well. So those would be your internal stakeholders. External stakeholders are the taxpayer groups. In some districts, they have a history of being very vocal advocates for or against certain things. The climate groups, the climate advocates, that's become a very, very strong and vocal segment. And obviously, tonight's webinar is evidence of that. And the media and the general public, getting them to buy into this. So I think get involved in getting those stakeholders on board as soon as possible. And I have a saying that I think it's impossible to over communicate. And so communication is key at all the steps in this process. Next slide, please. So you need to align the priorities for everybody. What do they understand? Everyone has to understand why you're doing this. Again, it could be multiple reasons, as I said earlier, but everyone needs to be clear about why we're doing this. And what are some of the things that are important considerations in developing the program? Managing realistic expectations. A program of this type with the costs and so forth. You don't want to raise expectations that you're going to replace your whole bus fleet, in a couple of years. It's probably not going to happen overnight, and so that's important. So people understand how this is going to be rolled out. And the fleet vehicles is, the charging is important. You're going to have to charge these buses. Is it possible to combine that charging activity? Since they'll charge at night and maybe between runs, will they? Can you actually incorporate a public charging option where parents and other visitors to the district can charge their vehicles? Hopefully, as these buses are acquired, that there'll be a parallel use of electric vehicles by the public. Also, workplace charging. Employees who want to drive to work and charge, that might be able to be used. To be applied to get double duty out of these charging stations. Next slide, please. Funding and resources. Okay, a couple of the options that I wanted to point out, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with these already, but the New York State Truck Voucher Incentive Program, That is money that really flowed from the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. We all heard about the multi-billion-dollar Volkswagen settlement. Each state got a certain amount of money based on the proportion of bad VW diesel vehicles. In New York State, there were 25,000 vehicles that were non-compliant and faking out with the emission test. So we got quite a bit of money. We got 118 million. The state, through the Department of Environmental Conservation in Nyserda, they developed a program how this money would be allocated. One of the things is to I think 50 million was allocated for buses, both transit and school. This program is complex in that there are different categories for different class of vehicles. Some of the categories have been exhausted, but I think there's still money for buses. One of the caveats here is that they're following a rule that's been around with the DERA program, Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. I know some of the districts have taken advantage of that, but that requires scrappage for, you have to take an old bus and you have to literally get it off the road. You put a hole in the engine and cut the chassis in half. Now and it has to be inactive service, and also I think 2009 or older. Some districts don't have buses that old, so that might be a barrier. Some might need that bus for a spare or something, so that's a factor to be considered. But that is one of the options right here in the state. The second category, this company Highland Electric School Transportation, they are model neutral. They don't push any one bus. They would help fund any of the electric vehicle bus options out there. We did all the Clean Cities groups in New York State, of which there are 6. We did a webinar on this at the end of 2020, and we had because it was the whole state, we had about 350 or 400 people. Highland people were talking about their program, and they use a variety of strategies to try to make the cost neutral. And one of the things is to have vehicle to grid incentives. I'm not an expert in this, and I won't try to be one tonight, but the vehicle to grid is really where you send power back to the grid or back to a building when demand is highest, and it helps you avoid some of the demand charges. As you get into this, you'll understand demand charges can be a real factor in terms of costs. Now, a colleague of mine who did my job in Massachusetts did a pilot 2 or 3 years ago in Massachusetts with 3 different districts. He sent me some of his material, but they found that the vehicle to grid, at least at that time, wasn't really ready for prime time. I think it's there, it's powerful. I was reading about the new F-150 pickup, the Lightning, and that truck should be able to provide 1 residential home with 3 days power just by sending it back from the truck. So the vehicle to grid technology is real, and that's a way you can save money. Managing your charging, reducing maintenance, the way you strategize with your infrastructure, and also coordinating available clean transportation incentives. So those are 2 of the options for funding that are available for buses. Next slide, please. Okay, so Clean Cities, Brady already mentioned that we're with the Department of Energy Clean Cities program. It's been around since 1992, and it was started as a result of the Energy Policy Act of 1992 that basically created this program to reduce petroleum use in the transportation sector, gasoline and diesel. And so there are about 90 coalitions across the country, various shapes and organizational forms. We're a local nonprofit. We been around since '94. We work with a variety of stakeholders here. We do work with multiple fuels and trying to achieve that goal. But one of the things we do is to provide coaching and technical assistance. We don't work with CAT fleets. It's supposed to be each fleet. Sorry about that. But coaching and technical assistance. I got a call today from someone from a village in Wayne County. They wanted to know about funding for EV charging for the village. So we try to work with them. Our service area is the 9-county Genesee Finger Lakes region, which aligns with a couple of other organizations, particularly the state, New York State Economic Development Council region. But our primary work, just because of population density, is in the Monroe County and in Ontario County. But we've helped plan for and install a number of different stations in villages and towns, electric vehicle stations, and we've had a very strong presence in electric vehicle charging stations, or EVSE, as they say, electric vehicle supply equipment, and also electric vehicles. Next slide, please. And that's it. Those are that's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions you may have, or tonight or at any other time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thank you for sharing all that valuable information with us this evening. And now I'll introduce our next speaker, who is Keith Dickerson. Keith is a sales director with Black & Veatch's Transformative Technologies Group. His focus is the business development and sales of infrastructure such as battery EVs and fuel cell vehicles, distributed energy resources, and storage. He brings 30 years of expertise in engineering, operations, sales, and strategic business development with companies such as Siemens, Schneider Electric, and Verizon. Keith holds a bachelor's degree in engineering management from the University of Alabama. He serves as a search and rescue air crewman in the U.S. Coast Guard. Served, I should say. Keith is based in Atlanta, so he's joining us from there this evening, and he enjoys cycling, trail running, and hiking. So let's give a warm welcome to Keith.
Thank you. Thanks, Brady. Welcome, everybody. So quick snapshot of Black & Veatch. We're a 106-year-old engineering construction company based out of Kansas City, Kansas. Primarily what we do is we focus on the engineering and construction of what I call horizontal infrastructure. So power with local utilities, telecommunications with the major carriers that you would imagine, water. There's a good chance that if you drink water, it probably has a touch of Black & Veatch somehow in terms of engineering or construction. A big part of what we do is focus on safety. So we actually have some of the best safety records in our industry. Next slide, please. So I want to give some props to David and to Mark, because you really touched on a lot of elements. So for example, we talked, Mark, you mentioned Tesla and Rochester Transit. They're actually clients of ours. David, you talked about some of the moving parts from a technology standpoint. So what's being used? I mean, obviously you have the buses, the vehicles, the charging stations, but you also frequently have able to, to be able to make the power work, add to the utility, provide that resiliency and that sustainability, is include things like solar panels, battery energy storage. So the use cases, I'm seeing a lot of the questions have come up. These technologies help the resiliency, the speed, all those types of things. So it's a blend of technologies. It's not just the buses and the charging stations. Next, please. So we look at it as a journey. When I was asked to do this presentation, the questions, well, what happens? Where do you start? And this can really apply to a variety of different ecosystems, whether you're talking about a large OEM like Tesla that's putting in their charging network, a transit agency. They have to make a lot of these same decisions or use a lot of these same techniques. And certainly a school district does. One of the things that David mentioned, you actually stole some of my thunder because I was going to talk about HILA myself. And, I spent a fair amount of time in the public sector with cities. A lot of times it was energy services. They wanted to renovate their building stock. They wanted to be more energy efficient. They wanted to incorporate renewables, be more sustainable, all those kind of things. But having that strategy of what they want to do is very, very important. Do they want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? All those types of things. And I think from a bus perspective, having the clean elements of electric buses is probably the thing that people want first, but you have to pay for it. So understanding that strategy, using innovative procurement vehicles, like what Highland does, and I'm not here to promote Highland, but they have a good business model. It's called transportation as a service. So you're bringing in the infrastructure, you're bringing in the vehicles, and to David's point, you're doing it in a generally in a revenue neutral type of format. So that's incredibly important. The next piece of it is, the vehicle availability. And Mark, as you alluded, it's just been going. Last year has been screaming. So the availability of vehicles is incredibly important. So having that relationship with your local rep, the people that have the access to vehicles, is an incredibly important piece of it too. But let's say you figured out how you're going to pay for it. You know what vehicles you want to go with. Let's go into the execution side of it. And that's really the bread and butter of what Black and Veatch does. So generally speaking, let's say a school district already has a piece of property or properties. Now it could be a depot. It could be, where you're going to put charging stations. It could be what we call on route charging. That's typically done with transit agencies or buses. But understanding your buildings, your property, your building stock, your facilities, and what you do is you go and do a detailed assessment. You understand, say, hey, I want to put 20 buses here. I have this amount of property. I have this much availability of power. How do you get that? Is from the local utility in a process called utility coordination. Understanding how the permitting works. The utility and the permitting are what we call the long poles in the process, because let's say you need 5 megawatts of power and there's not 5 megawatts power available there. So the utility is going to have to plan to add that additional capacity. On the same context, the permitting piece of it is very, very important, because each jurisdiction is going to be different. By virtue of us doing the Tesla super network and doing Electrify America and having relationships with utilities, we know how this works. So it is we have a kind of a funny saying: if you've met one utility or one jurisdiction, you've met one. So understanding those local requirements, working with unions is a great piece of it, because after you go through the permitting, the utility coordination piece, you have done the detailed engineering, you're going to start doing the actual construction. So, things such as the mobilization, managing local contractors, managing the materials. I mean, you might have heard in the news about chip shortages and commodity shortages. Those are impactful to the supply chain. So whether you're talking about vehicles or equipment or copper that's used, in wire for that matter, or steel that's used in switchgear, those are all important things. But let's say you get through all those processes, kind of the closing phase of it, and this is another incredibly important piece of it, is the operation and maintenance aspect of it. Not just the buses, but also the infrastructure. Even though, we at home, we were used to power being easily turned on and off and available in instances of a transit agency or a commercial fleet or a school district. Having the power available all the time is incredibly important. And operation and maintenance is an increasing area in which our clients are saying, how do I deal with this? So those are the steps. Next slide. And I have an appendix which we probably we're probably limited for time right here, but here's some, because I'm an engineer and engineers are terrible, we like details. I add a little extra set of details or some of the things that are part of the process, but also gives you some look-sees at some installed sites in construction, and what we do to put together engineering packages. And I think that's me.
That's great. Thank you, Keith,
My pleasure.
for all the details in the appendix and all the information that came before that as well. Lots of great info there. So thank you. Next up, we have Dave Velasquez, and he is the Director of Engineering and Facilities Management for the Rochester Genesee Regional Transportation Authority. He's responsible for capital projects and systems facilities management for RGRTA. Recent projects include electric bus infrastructure for 20 new charging stations, a new 21,000 square foot advanced environmental service building, a new connection and new connection hubs as part of Reimagine RTS. He received a BS and MS from Clarkson University. He's a licensed professional engineer and code enforcement official in New York State. So let's welcome Dave.
Good evening, and thank you, Brady and Katie, for putting this together. And I can tell you the order that you put this together and the folks that you had speaking for me, I highly recommend you do everything that they told you to all the Fairport, to the school districts out there, because what they laid out is really the process that we went through, and with Black and Veatch, and they did a very nice job of laying out the procedure that we went through to get where we are today. Just for some background, we are the Regional Transit Authority for this area. Our fleet is about 500 buses, and about 200 of those are 40 and 60 foot buses, which we are on our journey now to electrify. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Katie. So here you can see our general facility, and these are actually the plans that Black and Veatch prepared for us. This was started in around 2018 when we did this. At the bottom of the slide is the where we put some new distribution and electrical gear. As you move up to the north, we go over our roofs. We went over the roof to get the electrical into our garages. You can see our garages are labeled. It's kind of maybe a little small there, but the big rectangles are garage A, garage B, and garage C. And in garage, on the wall between garage B and C is where we put the electric charging stations. There's a lot of information here, so Keith, I hope it's okay that I copied your drawing.
That's good.
So the next slide. So our facility was built in 1974, and you can see by this picture here, it was, and here's the tongue-in-cheek part, it was well suited for electrifying our bus operations. Our utility gear is very old. It's about 1974, so it's about 50 years old. So it's really not ready for electrification of our fleet. So if you go to the next slide. The good thing is we were able to go off of our existing feed and put a new 3,000 amp main breaker and switch gear, which you see in this picture, which is out in our parking lot to the south of our building. And we were able to, provides enough power for the first 10 buses. You can go to the next slide. That power from there runs over the top of our building and eventually gets to these main distribution panels. So that's the equipment to the left there, the gray equipment. And to the right of that is the power units. And you can see the payloader in the picture to the far left to just give you a perspective of the size of the equipment that we had to put in. And this is just for the first 10 buses, although the gray panels have enough room for the next 10. And what we'll do for the next phase is just duplicate those white power units to the left where the payloader is in the picture. So you can see how much real estate it takes up in our bus facility. And that's something to consider. I know most school districts, I think most school districts park their equipment outside, but you still have to accommodate that room somewhere on your campus. If you go to the next slide, please. So here you can see a kind of a schematic diagram of our system. So the picture on the far left is the switch gear that you saw out in the first picture that I showed you. That's actually owned by RG&E. The next set of the next group of squares is rectangles is to the right of that is as we move to the right is the gear you saw in the parking lot to the south of our building. And then we go back over into the building, and the middle be easier if I had a pointer here, but I'm sorry, I apologize for that. But the middle triangle, there you go, Katie, so whoever's doing that. So go to the next group to the right. There you go. Keep going. One more. That's the main distribution gear that you saw inside the building by the payloaders. And if you go to the right once more, skip over those little boxes, that box right there is the white power units that you saw also by the payloader. And then you finally get to the electrical or the charging stations further to the right there. Those are the two columns you can see standing up there. So that's a general schematic that we came up with. And again, we went through a lot of planning to come up with this scheme, if you will, and Black and Beach helped us do that and how we were going to do this, these first phases of the transition to electric charging stations. So if you can go to the next slide. So here you can see the installation. This is one of our electric buses. And I know a question came up on the cost of school buses. I don't have the cost of school buses, but I can tell you that an electric bus is about $900,000. That's compared to a diesel bus of about $480,000, just to give you a rough perspective on the costs there. And like David Keith mentioned, we were able to use the VW settlement money for paying some of the difference. They paid the difference in cost actually between the diesel bus and a electric bus. So that worked out very well for us for for this project. Over to the left there, you can see the charging station, which is a provided by BTC Power of an EV Connect charging station. So if you can go to the next slide. So here's a close-up view of our bus getting charged by the charging station. And you can see here just an example of the challenges that you have. They sent these charging stations with 2 cords, but in reality, only one really exists. The other one is just kind of was accidentally put on when they sent us the equipment. So those are the things you kind of deal with when you're starting the beginning phases of a project like this. So this is 100 kilowatt DC fast charger that you can see here. Go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. So I guess I'm done here. The other things I will say is that we did take advantage of Concession, Mitigation, and Air Quality Grant in around 2007 that we received. As I mentioned before, we're also working with the VW Volkswagen settlement money as paying for the difference in the cost for a diesel and electric bus. And we are also working with the New York Power Authority with that money to work on this. We're also working with Nyserda on a lot of data collection for how the bus functions and how it's performing. And we're also working with Rochester Gas and Electric. They have Make Ready funding that is going to help pay for the next set of improvements to our facility for the electrical bus infrastructure. And I think that's all I have.
Well, thank you, Dave, for sharing all of that and sharing your experience and the RTS experience with converting to these electric school buses. So thank you.
Yep.
Next up, we have our 5th and final speaker of the evening before we move on to the Q&A, and hopefully you can all hang around for that. That next speaker is Assembly Member Jen Lunsford. Jen is proud to represent the good people of the 135th State Assembly District, which includes the towns of Webster, Penfield, East Rochester, and Perrington on the east side of Monroe County. She's a member of the Environmental Conservation Committee. Jen was born on Long Island to a working mom and stay-at-home dad. She graduated from Patchogue Medford High School and then went on to Hartwick College in Oneonta. where she dual majored in political science and philosophy. After working as a paralegal for a major international law firm, Jen attended Boston University School of Law, where she concentrated in healthcare law, served as a note editor on the American Journal of Law and Medicine, and won the Dean's Award for Constitutional Law. Following law school, Jen moved to Rochester, where her husband grew up, to begin her legal career. Jen has spent the past 11 years working as a litigator, focusing primarily on plaintiff's side personal injury, workers' compensation, and social security disability. Jen has deep roots as a community volunteer and activist fighting for reproductive justice, criminal justice, and universal health care with organizations like Lawyers for Good Government and If, When, How. Jen ran for office because she felt a call to service following the 2016 election to shape the world into a place of hope and opportunity for her son and for all the families of her district. Jen lives in Parenton with her husband, Scott, and their 4-year-old son, McKay. When she is not fighting for truth, justice, and the American way, Jen enjoys reading, cooking, and spending time with her family. So let's welcome Assemblymember Jen Lunsford.
Thank you, and thank you all for being patient with that very long intro. I'm a very interesting person. It takes a long time to introduce me. You may have noticed that everyone else who spoke had a very long resume that sounded like it was applicable to the thing we were discussing today, whereas I do not. That is because I am here today to talk to you about government. I'm here to talk to you about how we pay for things. So this is a bummer, and buckle up. As I suggested, one of the reasons I don't have slides is because much of what I was going to cover has been covered by other speakers. You all have heard about the Nyserda grants. We'll get to that in a minute. What I think I'd like to do very briefly is just talk to you a little bit about how you pay for school buses. So I'm a state level legislator, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about school boards and a little bit about other government entities. So bear with me, and if people who know more about that than me would like to correct me, have at it. When you vote in your school board elections, you'll notice more often than not, there's a referendum. And that referendum might be the Fairport School District wants to buy 3 new buses. That is because you as a voter have to vote on that part of the budget. School budgets come in buckets, and the transportation budget is one of those buckets. Someone asked if the charging infrastructure was aidable in the chat. Aidable is meaning counting towards getting funding from the school budget. And I'll get to that in a minute. These are aidable buckets of money. Now, when you buy new school buses, there's 3 ways really you can pay for them. You can put them through your school budget, which takes the funding that you get from taxes and from state aid and allocates them towards certain purchases. You can have what's known as a municipal bond, which I'm sure we understand. I can explain more later if we need to. And then there's additional grant money. When we're talking about electric buses, EVs, everyone has been talking about Nyserda. Nyserda is a public authority. So that's the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I don't think anybody mentioned it. And I am going to put the entire implementation manual in the chat for those who are so interested that they want to see the entire implementation manual. The Nyserda EV grants are split into basically a matrix. They have funding for EV heavy duty trucks, for transit buses like you see in the city, and for school buses. The school bus portion is actually the smallest. In the current manifestation of these grants, there's only $5.5 million allocated for EV school buses. I'm going to perhaps take someone else's answer here. The average cost of a EV school bus is 2 to 3 times the cost of a diesel bus. So you're somewhere between usually $300,000 and $400,000. And that's just for the upfront cost of the bus itself. The charging infrastructure, all the other things you would need to do to make your lots or your garages charging ready, that is an additional cost on top of that. The Nyserda grants are vouchers. You have to demonstrate that you've paid for it to get the money back, which means that districts need to have this money to be reimbursed for it. And that's an essential part of almost every state grant. So when you think about how you're going to pay for these things, understand you need to generate that money on the front end to get the voucher on the back end. Also, there are certain qualifications, other kinds of criteria that I won't get into because it's very specific. When we consider what stands in the way legislatively from allowing school districts to make this decision, there are a few laws that do need to be changed. Right now in the education law, I apologize, this is dry and there's a lot of people involved, so my apologies. In the education law, you are limited from leasing a bus for more than 5 years, because that's generally about the service life of most bus leases. There is a bill currently held by an excellent legislator named Pat Fahey out of Albany. And that is, I'll give you the number, A6754. I'm going to ask someone else to please stick that in the chat. That bill does 3 things that are actually really helpful. Number 1 is it expands the time during which a school district can lease a bus to 10 years. This would allow districts that are looking for an EV lease more time to spread that cost out, more commensurate with the life of that bus and the affordability of that lease. 2, that bill also adds charging infrastructure to the definition of things that are aidable. So that is also very important. And the third thing it does is it adds the list of charging infrastructure to what you can list among your transportation expenses, which is part of that same process. The bill's actually rather long and very, very technical if you read it, but it's because a lot of tiny things need to be changed to recognize the fact that this charging infrastructure is part of the ownership of an EV bus. You had some good discussions earlier about the kinds of things you need to do to gear up to lay the foundation for this kind of program. One of the things we need to do is change the law at the state level. There are a fair amount of co-sponsors on that bill. I am one of them. Pat is the better person to ask questions to, but I'll do my best. I did have her legislative director give me a rundown so that I could answer questions if people had them. But we are doing what we can to help support this. Another factor is the money. Some people have mentioned the Volkswagen settlement. That was a large, tens of billions, I think it was $30 billion lawsuit. That money is finite. That's in a bucket. And some people have said that money's exhausted. It is exhausted as it pertains to, I believe, heavy duty trucks. Once that's exhausted for EV buses, it's done. That's what we did with that money. So the question is would we continue to fund Nyserda grants, or would we find another way to fund EV buses? And I think that's an open question. One of the reasons we still have EV bus money is because people aren't asking for it yet. I think the market for heavy duty electric trucks was a little bit further down the road than EV buses. You're starting to see more motion in the transit sector, but we need to strike while there's still money, frankly. $5.5 million goes fast, $150,000 at a time. So I would encourage you, if you are considering this, to hop on that bandwagon. I have, again, put the implementation manual in the chat for you to consider. Now, you've also gotten some good advice about what you need to do to bring in the stakeholders. And as somebody who deals with the stakeholders, I cannot encourage you enough to spend your time in the community. Everyone who's here cares about this issue and wants to do this for their community. There are many, many people who do not want to spend one more dime on something they don't have to spend money on. And those are the people you need to talk to convince that this is a good idea, that it is a cost savings in the long run, and that it is worth the investment. And I encourage you to stop talking to me. I'm on your side. Go out and talk to your neighbor. Go out and hold community forums where people from the community, like what we're doing today, can ask questions. This is a pretty professional group that we're dealing with today. You need to talk to the people who are going to vote yes or no on that budget, because the budget is the place it's going to start. If you can't get that budget across the floor, that has a referendum on those buses, you can't go anywhere. because so much of my presentation was already covered, I am not going to belabor the point. Let me just run quickly down my notes here. When we're talking about advocating for funding, I do want to say, when you purchase a school bus, it has to be approved by two commissioners: the Commissioner of Transportation, DOT, Commissioner of Education, the State Education Department, SN. When we talk about electric vehicles, we're often talking about them in terms of the CLCPA, which is an environmental DEC issue. And when those bills go through, like the one we have now, it's in the Education Committee and then has to go to Ways and Means. And they're paid for by Nyserda grants. That means that the legislators you need to talk to are on the Transportation, Education, Energy, and and Ways and Means committees. That's a lot of people to mess things up. So go in with a clear message, make sure everyone's on the same page, and I'm happy to help navigate those systems for you if you need assistance. I am going to leave it at that, and we can turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Assemblymember Lunsford, for giving us some insight into how all that stuff works with going through local government and state government and how that's all connected there. So thank you for that information. We are moving on to the Q&A time now, and it looks like we do have a decent amount of time left for questions. So hopefully we'll be able to get to everyone's questions. There were some that already showed up in the chat, but also you can feel free to press the raise hand button. If you hit reactions and then raise hand, you can get a little digital hand up, and then you can ask a question out loud if you want to do that, or just put it in the chat. That's fine as well. And if we do not get to your question this evening, we will do our best to send you the answer in a follow-up email. We are planning already on having a follow-up email that we will send out soon after our webinar has finished. Not necessarily tonight, but you'll get it soon. So I actually have a question to ask all 5 of our speakers, and maybe we can go in reverse order. So we'll go to Assemblymember Lunsford first. But that question is, in your opinion, what does success look like in 5 years as far as transitioning to zero emission school buses?
That every Monroe County school district has begun the process of trying to implement this. I would love to say it means that we have buses in place. I know how things work. If everyone has gotten the stakeholders on board and has started down the road, I think that would be success.
Thanks. Let's go to Dave Velasquez next.
Sure. For us, the governor's guidance for us is that by 2025, we have 25% of our fleet, and by 2035, we have 100% of our fleet. So in 5 years for me would be, we have 25% of our fleet done, and we have a new charging depot built on our campus, and it's to Assemblymember Lunsford, I would say, and that it's fully funded. That'd be great.
Thanks, Dave. Keith, we'll go to you next.
I would say the enabling legislation, the business models, and the vehicle and infrastructure all availability are in alignment, and it's known how to do this, and we just rinse and repeat.
Got it. Next, David Keith, what do you think?
Well, I think that it was well said by Assemblywoman Lunsford. I think if they have started the process in 5 years, despite what we wish for and hope for, that would be a good step, given the scale of this and the cost, et cetera.
Thanks, David. Mark, what do you think for this one?
Well, from the school bus industry standpoint, what we would like to see, obviously, is the product get to a point where it's reliable and people will trust in the product. And then to Keith's point, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to happen, like everybody's spoken about tonight. Infrastructure is a huge part of this, And we've got grid issues, and I would like to see within 5 years for us to get to the point where our grid is capable of powering all these vehicles, which would catapult this into the, to the next level. So infrastructure and funding and fine tuning the product so they're reliable and can give many years of good service to the taxpayers, the state, and the kids.
Thanks, Mark. Next, we had several questions that came in regarding charging. So to start with, what is the cost of buying and installing chargers, and are grants available for those chargers? Excuse me. Who would like to take that one?
I could jump in on that. There are a lot of different chargers on the market. There's we use DC chargers for our vehicles. There's fast charge DC chargers. There's slow charge DC chargers. The slow charge DC chargers will run anywhere on average $8,000 to $12,000. That's not site work. That's the charger itself. A fast charge power control system. If you could picture like an apartment-sized refrigerator, those can run anywhere from $50,000 to $65,000, $70,000. And those can power 4 dispensers. So a slow charge, 1 dispenser, 8,000 to 12,000, charges 1 bus. A fast charger, roughly in the $60,000 price range, can charge 4 buses, 1 bus at a time. No, that's not site work. That's not grid to transformer. That's just, the charger itself. So those are good, good budget type numbers. And then of course there's a lot of variables for the site development and getting from the grid to the transformer.
Yeah, to Mark's point, that we get a lot of questions, and unfortunately, it becomes it depends, because let's say, and I saw a question in the chat about how many chargers can you use? Well, you can actually use 1 charger for every bus in some instances, so that exponentially increases the power requirements. In a lot of instances, construction, it has risk associated with it. And what we see, so for example, in a transit agency, is let's say you have some environmental issues because they have used carbon-based lubricants and fuels. In New York City, it's wrought with danger, so to speak, because you have literally decades of infrastructure that have been built on top of one another. So it's a very interdependent, site-specific, power-centric question related to the cost of putting in that infrastructure.
And as it pertains to the grants, another thing that bill does is expressly state that the chargers and the infrastructure to install them would be applicable for the Nyserda grants, that's something you could ask for. But given the caps on the grants, you're going to exhaust the cap on the grant with the cost of the bus. So you wouldn't be able to use it for both. But there are, and also again, it becomes aidable. It becomes, something that you can fold into your transportation costs and something you can fold into your lease.
Yeah, I would just add that I would agree with Mark that we use up probably almost $100,000 for those DC fast chargers as kind of a budget number. And that doesn't include the infrastructure, the first stuff that I showed you, which was the first phase was about $1 million. So that would be, the chargers would be on top of that first, on top of the infrastructure. The chargers would be on top of that $1 million. And then to Keith's point, that's why we went over the roof, because it eliminated going underground and dealing with those kinds of issues. But that has its challenges as well. But I think I would agree with everybody's comments about the numbers.
Thank you. Now, also relating to charging, someone asked how many buses can be charged at once And it sounds like that's another it depends question, depending on the type of charger and how you want to set it up. But would anyone like to add anything else related to that one? How many buses can be charged at once?
Well, I can just say you better talk to your utility provider before you even consider how many, because that's really going to be the governing factor is how much the utility can provide and what you may have for an electric services. Most services in buildings, Mark and Keith, maybe you can agree or not, or David, is that the building services aren't going to have room for your charging, basically. So anything you do would be on top of your building service. And we were lucky enough for the first phase that we could go off of our building service. But you really have to talk to your utility provider early and often, I would say.
Anytime you put in a DC charger, DC fast charger of any type, that's the first thing that we do is talk to the utility and often and give them some conceptual ideas, put that load letter in and hope the bus schedule and the construction schedule and the utility schedule all coincide. Kind of the catchphrase that we use, the most expensive electric vehicle is one you can't charge. And all those things have to come together. Isn't that good? Is that good, David? Yeah.
I'd like to add
to Keith's point, and sorry, Mark, and they always coincide exactly too. So it always works out nicely and everything gets done together and at the same time.
Yeah.
And, everybody's laughing because it doesn't work that way. So, and I don't know if people know how familiar they were from our facilities on East Main Street in the city of Rochester. And I'm not sure if people know, but they're ripping up that whole street right now. And that's the main utility corridor for RG&E. So we started talking to them probably 3 or 4 years ago. So they were aware of what we were doing. And coincidentally, they were redoing all the utilities on on Main Street. So it's really, in this case, the timing has actually worked out really nice for us, but it's, it was strictly happenstance, really, what they were doing. And just to add to that, there's two steps. One is the utility can provide the electric, and the other is what they have to do at the substation level, if they have to go back and do work at their substation. And that is about an 18-month to 2-year lead time they've been telling us, if they have to do substation upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something we've been skirting around all evening, which is that as our state electrifies more and more people get electric cars and we have more electric fleets, we have a statewide power infrastructure problem that we need to deal with, that we need to be 5 years ahead of technology at the consumer level all the time, and we aren't. We are simultaneously trying to move from fossils to renewables while also creating more power overall, and that requires a lot of infrastructure work.
Oh, Jen, I would 100% agree with you. I mean, that's really key to whatever you're doing from a charging perspective. And I don't even think the utilities have considered the home charging and all that kind of stuff yet, and what that impact's going to be. So better to get in early.
The other question that's commonly asked by the utility company is not only what are you planning on doing in the immediate future. Right. You need to we want to future-proof, prepare you for what your plans are down the line, because you don't want to be ripping up pavement every year to put charging systems in. So there's a whole lot of drilling down that goes on when you electrify. And David, you've lived it. And so until you actually do it, a lot of this sounds super complicated, but the good news is there are some fantastic resources with the utility companies, the charging companies, the folks at Nyserda are fantastic to work with. Each one of these electrification scenarios are projects, and it takes a team to bring them together. And we have some great people in the state that are available to help. So just wanted to add that.
No, Mark, I can't agree more. The Nyserda and the New York Power Authority have been great partners of ours, and the utility for that matter, despite the challenges that they face. And we have regular meetings with them all used to be in the same room, but now on Teams meetings, almost bi-monthly meetings with them to go over this stuff and just keep discussing it, basically.
Thank you, everybody. It sounds like a lot of different considerations there. One more related to charging, which is how long does it take to charge a bus every day?
I can answer that. For school buses, not on transit, but school buses, a DC fast charger can charge and when I say empty, it's not really empty because the batteries are not allowed to go to empty. They can charge in or around 3 hours. A DC slow charger can be anywhere from 7 to 10 hours, depending on the system. So, and again, like I talked about before, there are regenerative braking aspects of these vehicles. So they're putting energy back into the bus. I'll give you an example. Last week, we drove an electric bus from Ballston Spa, from actually Saratoga Springs to Poughkeepsie. We traveled 93 miles. We used 62% of that battery. And we were able to fill that up in 2 hours at a cost of $57 at a J1772 DC fast charge site. So there's easily can charge if you have a bus on a charger overnight, very easy. And if it's not on empty and you have a fast charger, you can charge it between runs in as little as 3 hours. And again, that's from empty, not empty, but empty in 3 hours. So if you've only used 20% of the battery, you're going to charge that bus up, in that relative amount of time for the afternoon run. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you. The next question, and some of you have already shared some numbers as far as the cost of the buses themselves, but this one is looking at kind of a compare contrast of 3 different options, being an electric school bus, a diesel bus, or a natural gas bus. What are the differences in cost and differences in the life and durability of each type of bus?
Okay, again, if you don't mind, I can certainly help with that. So the average the state contract diesel bus right now in New York State is in the neighborhood of 105,000 with all the standard New York State DOT required options on the bus. Obviously, districts will, add to the basic bus like we all do with our automobiles, which brings the average cost of a diesel bus to about 115,000. Natural gas is about double what we don't. I've delivered a lot of school buses in 21 years. Never have delivered a natural gas school bus in the state of New York, but there are states where they do offer them. California is one, and they run about double what a diesel does. Electric. Assembly person Jen said 3. She was spot on with the price. They're anywhere from our state contract price is $348,000 base price, and typical options would bring that up to around $360,000. Life expectancy, batteries on our bus, which are Proterra, are warranted 100% for 8 years. And based on what we're hearing, and this is all, speculation because we haven't had school buses there, you could count them on one hand, 6 months ago in the country. We're being told by our battery management manufacturer that those batteries after 8 years will have 80% life left in them. In New York State, the average life of a bus is really not predicated on the powertrain. It's predicated on the amount of exposure they've had to corrosive road chemicals. So with all that being said, we would expect an electric bus to last as long as a diesel bus, as long as the bodies hold up. the powertrain, is covered. Diesel, standard diesel warranty is 5 years, unlimited mileage. Our battery management system is 8 years, unlimited mileage. So based on that information, we feel very comfortable that the buses are going to be durable and last as long as a diesel bus would. Sorry, that was long.
Got it. Now we are getting toward our end time here, so I'd like to go to Darren Everhart, who has his hand raised, and then we'll wrap things up. I apologize if there are any questions we do not get to now, but Darren, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for letting me speak. First of all, I want to thank, is it Katie Reig? Am I saying that right? Or Reig or Rig? She was the invite, the reason I heard about this. So appreciate that. Couple things, a couple of comments, not so much questions. And Mark, I don't know if you touched upon this, but one of the things you have to consider is the dramatically lower maintenance costs on these vehicles. Again, Mark, you may have touched upon this. I own a fully electric automobile. And it's just, there's no maintenance. I heard you mention no oil changes. What about your brakes? You don't hardly touch your brakes. Your maintenance costs are considerably lower. Now that doesn't completely offset the higher cost, but it certainly helps. And I just wanted to talk about performance because that's something that kind of gets overlooked in a lot of these discussions, because naturally we got to talk about the cost because it's a major component. This electric car that I own is far and away the greatest vehicle I've ever owned in my life. The performance is off the charts. It's either easy to drive. I think the training of drivers would be very simple and easy to do. And I think that would translate very well to school buses. Someone had put a question in about solar. I have rooftop solar at my house. I'm literally driving on sunshine. And that can also be in the conversation as you transition to school buses, that is there room in your school districts on your rooftops and such to maybe add solar, which would help to offset those costs as well. So this is the future. It's time to get on board with it, but obviously there's massive questions. And I just want to say I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Darren, for sharing your experience, and thank you for attending. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope everyone else enjoyed it, or at least learned something from it. I'm sorry to say we do have to wrap things up. I know there are a few questions we did not get to, but we'll do our best to email you the answers to those questions. Katie, would you be able to just share that, the last couple slides? Thank you. So as far as getting on board and getting more involved, we just have a few suggestions here. First, learn more. A lot of information got thrown at everyone this evening, and I know personally I have to still process a lot of that, but there is plenty of more information you can learn. I'm going to share in the chat a document where there are resources for learning more. We'd ask you to share what you've learned with others, whether family, friends, people in your school district, and we will make this recording available. You can think about joining a local Color Your Community Green team, or maybe starting a new team. We do have, I'm just thinking about as far as who's represented here today, we do have teams in Penfield, Pittsford, Fairport. A team is in the works in Webster, Brighton as well, in the city of Rochester. There's a team in the neighborhood of the South Wedge. And sorry if I missed any, but there are other, or Rondequoit, and there are other teams around the area, but it was really the Color Your Community Green teams that made this event happen this evening. And those are a great way to organize around climate solutions like electric school buses. And finally, lobby elected officials, whether at the municipal level or whatever level is going to work best, school boards, or municipal government, to increase incentives and remove barriers to adoption. So also should think about that New York State level, like Assemblymember Lunsford mentioned, with those different committees there. So I'll go ahead and put those links in the chat now. There's one additional one, which is for a feedback form. We would appreciate your feedback on the webinar this evening. That will help us to improve future webinars. And we would appreciate any constructive feedback you can share there. So that is about it. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. Hope you have a good night. hope the rain didn't do anything too bad. I know I've been hearing some thunder here, so hopefully everyone made out okay with that and no one lost power. But thank you again, and hopefully we can continue these conversations at the school district level and move electric school buses forward.
Thank you, Brady. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Big thank you to all of our guest speakers too. Really appreciate your time this evening and sharing all your knowledge about this stuff.
Our pleasure.
Enjoyed it.
I'm going to stop recording at this point.